Báilte Rif Gachéine and Seán Maynooth Margin Tour and you. We've been chilly here in Maynooth this morning, and you're all very welcome. And thanks to everybody for making it here. We are in our 5th seminar of this seminar series this term, and they've been going really well, and it's great to advance this one. We will have another round of seminars which we'll be letting people know about shortly after. Certainly, I suppose after the start of the new year, and we're really looking forward to that. But today we are really thrilled to be joined by, I'm joined first of all by my colleague and co-chair, Professor Mark Boyle. We're really thrilled to be joined by Sarah Glavey, who's the Principal Officer in the Department of Public Expenditure, NDP Delivery and Reform. And just so people understand what she's doing, she's effectively leading on the strategic development and the coherence and the coordination of public sector reform across the whole of the public sector. So it's a really important role in the role of the Department of Deep Depender, as we call it. So I think that it's great to have Sarah with us today. And Sarah's joined by Trevor Vaugh, who is actually in the department working with Sarah, but obviously, as many people know, was here as an academic and leading on working on research, working on design here, and has recently moved, if you like, having worked between the two, and has recently moved. And I think that's what we want to hear about today, more than anything, but as well as I think the strategic positioning of this really interesting concept of designing better public services. And the word designing, I think, is really important, and what that means and why it's been introduced, and what the underpinning, I think, philosophy and principles behind it are, so that people understand what you're trying to do in, I think, helping rethink how we deliver for the general public. I just want to make a point that's obvious for any civil servants who are attending, but maybe might not be as obvious for everybody else. There actually is an election on, and that means that civil servants are slightly more limited in what they can say. So the last time we were here, the election was announced a few days later, so civil servants can say, can give background policy, but actually it's a bit tighter during the election period, because it's politicians who are talking about policies. So civil servants can give background about policies, but they can't really debate and argue the merits of policies, because that's been done alternatively. And obviously, designing public services can go anywhere in terms of discussing it. Equally, they can't talk about future policies. So we just have to be a wee bit careful on that, because it's not fair to put anybody in a position where something accidentally might happen. That's basically. So it's not that civil servants have been closed, but there is just this rule for during the period of the campaign. We just have to be a wee bit more careful. So just to say that doesn't limit obviously academics and say whatever you want, but the civil servants are just a bit more caught. So like I said, it's great to be here. We're going to hand over to the two of you. Going to talk for 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open it up. And for the people online, and it's great to see so many people here online, if you could put comments in, and we can then myself and Mark can then maybe summarize some of those and put those to the speakers for comment back or for response. So over to the two of you.
Great, fantastic. I think we might just introduce ourselves, and then I'm gonna kick off, followed by Trevor. We have a few slides to share, but we'll aim to get through those fairly quickly so that we can get into a good discussion with yourselves. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks very much to Seán for inviting us, and to Mark as well. I've already been introduced, so I don't need to introduce myself again probably. So I'll hand over to Trevor, and then I'll say a word about my background as part of my presentation. So Trevor.
Yeah, and hello everybody, great to see so many familiar faces. Seán's actually done a great job introducing me as well. I'm very sad to have moved on from Maynooth, but driving in was lovely. Yeah. So looking forward to this.
And I guess Maynooth's potential loss, but not total loss, I'm sure, with Trevor, is our gain certainly in the Department of Public Expenditure, NDP Delivery and Reform. Our acronym is Depender, so I'm just going to use that from now on. But yeah, we're delighted to have Trevor join our team. He's become part of the Public Service Transformation Division in our department, and I suppose a lot of hopefully we'll dig into some of what that looks like as an example really of the partnerships between research and policymakers. So yeah, really a fantastic topic, and looking forward to discussing with you. From my side, I just as I said, I'll go through a few slides, and I suppose that's really just to give a perspective from inside our department, and from when we talk about policy making, kind of try to give a sense of what does that look like. Often a lot of the discussion that we hear is about how to explain kind of our context and what we do and what's important, and why maybe we approach things the way that we do when we're developing policy. And I suppose you know, also maybe to give a sense of what are some of the innovations in that space, and how we're really trying to further develop the links, and to bring in, I suppose, the best expertise, the best ideas, and the best approaches and methods into the way that we deliver policy for the public. My background originally is in psychology and then organisational psychology. I'm delighted to see Mac McLaughlin here, so I have to give a shout out to Mac because he originally taught me when I was doing my undergrad in psychology in Trinity, and definitely had a big influence on my career trajectory and my interests, because he taught us about global health within the psychology undergraduate degree. So again, just it always good to kind of reflect on how these interests get picked up and developed. But I then spent 10 years working in the international development sector, including a big part of that time actually based in Trinity, doing work on establishing a multidisciplinary network for international development across Trinity, and setting up a lot of research and academic partnerships and education programs. So I suppose that's also just to say that I'm not unfamiliar with the academic environment, and also have made a bit of that transition from that environment into the civil service. 7 years ago, I came into the civil service. I spent 6 years in the Department of Health, working on, again, a common theme really within the Department of Health, looking at how we build up our capacity for doing policy better. So really the same type of theme throughout. And also then working on the COVID response for probably 3 years, working on the health protection response and public health reform. So kind of a focus again in my work on that interest in evidence, and our use of evidence probably in different policy making contexts. Obviously that was a emergency response that we all remember, but you know, we can maybe look at that a little bit more, and how we tried to draw on the best available evidence and data with that like huge national kind of priority and imperative at that time. So a year ago I moved into Dependur, and have followed that interest that I do have in again how we built up our capabilities to really improve the way that we try to solve problems for the public, which really is our ultimate goal. As Seán mentioned, that the agenda that we have is around public service transformation. So I'll just say a word about kind of what that looks like. Just at the outset, I had kind of put up a few things that I thought might be interesting to cover and discuss, and I'll just say a word about each of these. So you'll see them there, and hopefully those are topics of interest, and we'll kind of dig into them. But just to start off with, I suppose on purpose, the policy context that we have for all of this work, and actually the context that enables us to bring in design expertise and other expertise, is our policy around better public services. So that's a multi-annual policy led by my department. Our minister is Pascal Donoghue, again very supportive of this agenda. The strategy that's there is up to 2030, so we expect that to continue, but of course, as Seán said, that does depend on kind of government direction, but that is an agreed government policy up to 2030. It's all about transforming actually our public service delivery, but I suppose looking at you know, how we support the delivery of public services, including through building in the best possible approaches to that, and using the best evidence and data to drive transformation. That's our vision that's laid out, and I suppose again, I think Seán mentioned this, and of course it's very true. You know, universities as public sector bodies also are encompassed really by this broad framework. So I suppose as a central government department, part of our role is to lay out this framework, and then really to use all of the levers that we have available to drive towards this vision that we've laid out here, which is something I know that we can all kind of buy into and relate to. So integrated public service provision that meets the lives and improves meets the needs and improves the lives of the people of Ireland is kind of what we're about there. So how does that actually get operationalized really, and what does it look like? So again, As a department, our central government role is about, as laid out in our own strategy, is about enhancing governance, building capacity and delivering effectively. Okay, so that's what we say we do. And really working across government and across public service bodies to do that. And these are the pillars. So again, I won't dwell too much on this, but it's just to give a bit of a framing to it. So this is our policy. You'll see that I would say all of those pillars, so digital and innovation at scale, workforce of the future, and evidence-informed policy and services, are probably all relevant to our discussion here today, because of course with increased digitalization we have a huge wealth of data that we're trying to harness and use for public good. With the workforce and organisation of the future, that connects very well, I think, to your own kind of skills agenda and capacity building agenda as an institution. And evidence-informed policy and services is probably the one I'll kind of dig into the most here, because of the topic of the talk that we have today. And it's under that kind of remit that, again, we have the space to support areas like design. So again, I'll leave those slides with you so that you get more of a sense if you'd like to dig in. But those are kind of our overarching pillars of transformation. Just focusing on the third one there to go into a little bit more detail and again, a bit of signposting for you. So when we talk about evidence-informed policy and services, again, designed for and with our public, which is kind of the signaling of that interest around design and that intent to put design at a central location. Really what we're talking about there is engaging with the public in policy and service design, putting users first, service users first, and embedding systems and design thinking, continuous improvement, and then some aspects of data availability and sharing. So in particular, focusing on our unique identifiers across the public services and maximising the use of air codes, the universal business, or the unique business identifier, PPSN, mygov.ie. So really using that digital infrastructure to ensure that we harness our data and that we can link it, and the safe sharing of data. So these are kind of the headlines in terms of that policy, which was published in 2023. And again, really what we'll kind of maybe go through a little bit, myself and Trevor, is kind of what's going on there, what does that look like, how are we driving that agenda forward. But a couple of other hopefully kind of fairly high level signposting things, just to flag a few things that we could dig into a little bit more. Kind of really important to say there's a huge ecosystem, as you all know, and as you're part of, around this whole area of evidence for policy. And I just listed, and I'm gonna challenge anyone to fill any gaps that because I'm sure I've missed some players here, but particularly just to call out the role of the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Skills. And I know we have colleagues here, I see Leonora there in the audience as well. But their role and the creation of that department has been really important and really influential in across government in promoting this agenda around linkages between research and academia and policy and that wider ecosystem. And there's a huge number of initiatives underway really to promote that work. We have our policy there as well, so that's Impact 2030, which is across government policy as well. And I suppose just to mention a few of the initiatives under the Department of Further and Higher Education, because they are driving forward this agenda of how researchers and academics and policymakers can work better together. There's an evidence for policy unit in the department to bring a focus to that area. So Leonora and colleagues are part of that. There's a statement of research priorities that was published, which is available there publicly as well. And encouragement to individual departments as well to publish their research priorities. So really to give that to communicate outwards, like what are the policy priorities and what are the research priorities, where is evidence needed for key policy work going forward, again to help with planning and with the intent of encouraging partnerships. There was a call for evidence recently, so some of you might be aware of that too, and I think that's the first time that's been done through Further and Higher Education. That was an open call, and again that was really designed to provide a space for researchers and academics and universities to talk about their work and to really I suppose pitch some of the work and to sort of communicate what colleagues like yourselves are thinking about and what kind of areas you're focused on that you think would be of relevance to policymakers and to those government departments. And there's a civil service research network as well, which has been established in the last couple of years as a very practical forum for, again, researchers and policymakers to directly interact. Because of course, as we all know, although you know, we're aiming for kind of system-wide supports and mechanisms. Like there's nothing like the individual interactions and the personal relationships, just to share information. So I suppose continuing trying to do the balance of both. So really important that that department's role is called out. I won't read through all of the rest, but I think just to call out a couple from the point of view of my department, because I think they're maybe interesting examples of how we're trying to build capacities within the civil service to towards having these important kind of future-oriented skill sets, and having, I suppose, consumers of evidence and research, and I suppose so building the capacities that we want into the system, but also in order to be able to look outwards and really access all of the expertise and resources that are there. So we have the Irish Government Economic and Evaluation Service. And I think the history to that service is really interesting. So after the financial crisis, probably about 10 years ago, that service was established within government, and it was partially in response to critiques of government that there was insufficient economic capacity within the government departments. So the service was established. We now have several hundred economists and broader social scientists recruited through that specialist stream. And I suppose also kind of an interesting one which you might touch off, they're given a career path within the civil service as well. Okay, so recruited and their skills kind of preserved. That's quite different to the history of the civil service, which is really a generalist model of recruitment. But that's been a really important development for us in terms of building that capacity and retaining it within the system as well. The Government Statistical Service is based on a model of secondment from the Central Statistics Office. And again, that provides statisticians to work within government departments, typically in research functions or statistics functions, different models, I suppose, of how government departments use those experts. But we've really seen the build-up of that capacity, and that's been extremely an extremely good development over the last number of years. The building up of the design capacity is almost following a similar model. Okay, so that idea of how do we bring in specialist expertise, and Trevor will speak to that a little bit more, but I suppose just to give a sense of how we're thinking about building up skills and how that aspect of kind of training and capacity building. And the other piece I'll say is just in terms of how we access expertise, quite a lot of attention to international engagement. From my point of view and my team, a lot of contact with OECD in particular, and with the Commission. So just in terms of another part of the context, obviously we're very tuned into what's coming to us internationally, particularly on this topic of evidence-informed policy. So learning from other countries about how they build up their ecosystems around this kind of activity as well. I've been telling Trevor, probably quite bad. Okay, keep going.
We're getting there.
A couple more slides and then I'm going to hand over. I should have said at the outset that part of the reason I was going first is because my slides will pale in comparison to obviously our designers. so yeah, you a lot to look forward to there. So I suppose it just really these are actually what's listed here are some of the programs of work that are underway to take forward this evidence-informed policy space led by my department. So we mentioned the Government Evaluation Service. Trevor will talk a lot more about our work through our action plan and our principles for design to really commit to the development of design within our civil service and public service. A couple of other things that may be of interest to this audience, and you may be aware already, but maybe not. We have a big focus on open data, so making public data open by default. Of course, with exceptions around personal data and other kind of sensitive categories, but that's a huge drive, obviously internationally and here as well. And we do have our national open data portal, which currently has 20,000 plus data sets. We have a strategy that focuses on using that portal to make data available, with supports in place for both publishers, which again may be of interest to yourselves, and also then users of that data, and a number of different initiatives in place to promote that. So just for your information there. The National Data Infrastructure, where we talk about that, and that's largely led by the Central Statistics Office, working with specific government departments. Again, it's back to those unique identifiers. As a key mechanism to help us to plan service delivery. So connecting up our information across services to help policymakers to have the data that they need to plan services better, which is such an important agenda, as you all know, and is kind of say that, and it encompasses so much, but really that goal of improving services for the public is really at the core of that work. And we've referenced open government there, and a national open government plan. I suppose that's just to speak to the really important agenda that we have around building public trust in institutions, and an important aspect of that, the transparency of our work, and the openness, the open data being a part of that. Okay, I think I'm nearly through the framing. Just almost for your again possibly entertainment a little bit. We do have a policy cycle, right? And I suppose this is important because you'll see through, again, international literature around of which there is a huge wealth of kind of knowledge, again, in terms of how do we go about developing policy, huge knowledge, huge reflections and debate. We have in the department a policy life cycle, and I suppose that does lay out some of the important stages in policy development from our point of view. And you'll see there kind of at the top an agenda setting piece, which speaks to what Seán was saying about what we really do, which is advise on policy development. Okay, we advise the minister and the government on policy development, policy decisions. Obviously, we take our direction from in terms of priorities from the programme for government, and there will be a new programme for government with the new government. And so that agenda setting piece, and where the requests, I suppose, or the impetus for policy development is an important feature. We've evidence gathering and analysis, which of course is of interest to policy development. Consultation, huge focus nationally and internationally. How do we bring perspectives of the public, of users of services, but also of those involved in service delivery into our policy making process, preparing advice, systems implementation, evaluation. So the only reason I say kind of amusing is because, of course, in the real world, that doesn't look like that at all, okay? And that's part of the reason. Obviously, it's useful to have kind of sessions like this to kind of dig into maybe some of your questions on what does that actually really look like. The stages look nice, and they do all happen, but of course they don't often happen in a neat order. And I suppose, again, policy making can look very different depending on kind of where the impetus comes from. Sometimes it can be very quick. It can be, please develop a policy position on this quickly for the reasons of kind of a political reason, or it can be very slow, can be, take years. And as we said, it can happen during lots of different contexts, and that's kind of an important driver of how we do our work. So again, COVID being an interesting example, I think, as to how all of the resources were harnessed there to try to deliver the best outcomes for the public. And so just to kind of conclude, I think we kind of know what better policy should look like. Okay, so we have lots of really good, we've experience, we have expertise, we have a lot of we hear what is being said about what better policy should look like, and those are just some of the features. So top of the list, putting the public at the centre, okay, and again, the design approach is extremely beneficial to us from that point of view, and Trevor will speak to that. All of the kind of narrative and discussion around consultation, but not just consultation, right? And meaningful consultation. What does it look like? Co-design is a word that we hear a lot of at the moment. There's lots of work across government to really try to develop our approaches, but really with also a really kind of a lot to learn as well. Okay, and as you know from your own experiences, but also from your experiences engaging with different types of stakeholders across the system, and that bit about meaningful engagement and clarity around kind of consultation at the right times and with the right kind of expectation or clear expectations is just really important. Quite tricky to crack, and I think a lot of work underway to really try to do that better. Data and research, of course, we have spoken to. The learning aspect, I think, is really important. So like learning from the past, okay, so nothing tends to be a blank slate actually, and certainly in policy development the starting point is your previous policy, okay, so being aware of the context, but I think a lot more emphasis on learning from the delivery of previous policies, what went well, what went wrong is a huge feature. We have there closing the policy to implementation gap, and I suppose that's why from my department's point of view, having the remit around better public services across, so transformation program across all public services is actually a great there's a great opportunity in that, because we're talking about transformation services and really trying to which is the implementation of policy, let's say from one perspective anyway. So working across the system and bringing information and input from the services back into the policy making process. There's a great opportunity there, and we're trying to harness that. And then capability building, and really important for yourselves, the bit about strategic partnerships, which of which again there's a huge focus on that. I've put achieving impact in the bottom too. I shouldn't forget about it. Like how we evaluate our work, how we evaluate the impact of policy, again touches off a huge area of knowledge, but again is one that we're trying to develop. We've loads of examples of trying to bring in expertise including from academia, and some examples of from our communications and engagement work around our policy, our better public services policy. For example, a great conference that we held in September with the focus on evidence informed policy, where we were able to bring in kind of international, national colleagues, try to bring a mixture of people, of experts from across the board, including experts in all these areas that we've been talking about. So I suppose it's just to say we have a number of channels of kind of engagement with the work. And again, this is kind of the plug for finding out more about the actual policy, but also the opportunities to kind of get involved. And some of those involve networks, some of them involve, again, communications and engagement activities, but also it's where we publish our strategies, our guidance, and other kind of key documents. Okay, I've definitely spoken for too long, so I'll go back to, I'm going to hand back over to Trevor, but I suppose it is a really interesting agenda, definitely one that I'm kind of particularly kind of passionate about, and I think, yeah, looking forward to the discussion. I'm sure we'll touch off some of these topics and others. So over to Trevor's beautiful slides, and thank you, Trevor.
Thanks, Sarah. Where to start? Does anybody who designed that table?
Eileen Gray.
Eileen Gray, yeah, giving it away. So when I first joined over a year ago, our assistant secretary Marianne said her first words to me were, "Don't go native, be a designer," because the force of becoming a civil servant is very strong. And so I've held tightly onto that, including how I deliver slides. And as for over a year, I was the only designer. And trying to bring these maybe new approaches and different ways of thinking and different types of questions in. And I remember sitting in the Wicked room in government buildings and catching Eileen Gray's world famous table in the corner, and thought, like, there's actually two pieces of design here now. But Eileen is, if you haven't heard of her, she is one of the of 5 people who led the modernist movement of design, who changed how we create furniture, how we think about buildings, getting rid of the ornamentation to get down to functionality and contemporary materials, and actually understanding what people wanted, because their tastes had changed, their needs had changed. And I think that's, in a way, why design is now coming in, because we actually have to rethink a lot of the ways we do policy, design services. So I took solace in seeing Eileen sitting there on her own. The other reason I showed that table is because a lot of people think design is about aesthetics. You know, it's about how things look, beautiful objects, interiors, and in a way it is. We try to get beauty at the end of our process, but it really is the mindset, the thinking, the understanding people's needs, so we can create something that works for them, the philosophy of design. But it's also how we go about creating anything from a piece of furniture to a service to a policy. And it's exceptionally good, and the research shows it, and the practice shows it, it's exceptionally good at gaining deep empathy for people, starting with people's needs and uncovering hidden needs, unarticulated needs, in a way that kind of large surveys or focus groups just can't do. You have to talk to people. It's also incredibly good at driving co-creation. It pulls people together. It puts the thinking on the wall. So if anyone was over in our design studios here, or in any design studio, and even in our assistant secretary's office now, and the entire, it seems, the Department of Education is just Post-it notes and thinking in the open. That's because we like to co-create, get the people around to hear and see how the thinking is working, what we understand and where we want to go. It uses constraints as catalysts. So in the table example, it's the constraint of manufacturing processes or how we produce glass. In other places, it's legislation, it's policy, but we use those to unlock creative thinking. It's like if you ask an artist to paint a painting without direction, it's impossible. But if you say, I want it like this, and it needs to feel like this, suddenly you can start coming up with better ideas. And finally, I added this into our slide deck because someone said it's all well and good with its creative thinking until you end up in front of the Public Accounts Committee. Design is a risk mitigation approach. It's slow, steady, based on insight. It's experiments. An experiment is much smaller than a pilot. So we're learning as we go. We're getting out, talking to people, taking the learning back and iterating and improving. So in lots of ways, it's the ideal approach if you're trying to do something important like a new service or a new policy. Just a little bit of context as to why we need strategic design and context, and I'm very conscious. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go very quickly. Our department and every department is facing huge challenges. The country is facing challenges, the world is facing challenges, climate, war, trust, the growing right. There's so many challenges. If we go into healthcare, they've got their own set of challenges. Education, justice, the challenges are massive, and we actually need different ways of taking them on. And we need better approaches that not replace but complement the ways we're already trying to tackle these. The ecosystems are incredibly complex. This is the healthcare system in the United States. Our own healthcare system is probably not far off that. You can see the very bottom right-hand corner, it says patients. This is an ecosystem of child well-being, a huge amount of players. You know, if you're looking at the education system and who do involve in change, it's a huge number of people. It's very complex. The journey that a citizen has to go through to do anything is very complicated. This is a doctor in the NHS lying beside the forms that are needed to admit one person into one hospital for a night. You know, we're not far off that, and it's every service is very complex. And I'd say it's maybe they were designed individually, but not designed as a system. Complex humans, the most complex of all. Changing needs. The world is changing. The needs are changing. What people are going through is changing. And what I always say in my presentation is people don't always do what they think they do, or you think they do what you tell them to do. They don't always do what they think they do, and they don't always do what they say they do. So the traditional methods of focus groups at best, surveys at worst, just doesn't capture truth. And design is an ethnographic approach. It's about getting out to the context of where the problem is, getting the insight and bringing that back in so we can use it to design. I love this quote by Madeleine Albright. She said, we're taking on 21st century challenges, evaluating them with 20th century ideas and responding with 19th century tools. I do feel that design is a new type of tool set that we can use to take on the types of challenges that we're facing today. And it does so because it fills kind of that evidence gap that we talked about, engagement gaps, like some examples of how we engage with citizens through a design approach, the empathy gap. And it's not that the civil service and policymakers don't have empathy. It's very hard to get empathy when you are trying to write a policy, when you're dealing with such complexity of an area that you're working in. Innovation gaps. So our workshops, once we have the insight, it's about trying to think outside the box, push the thinking a little bit rather than kind of the easier option, which is kind of incremental improvement, building on what's already there and trying to make it better. Ambition. Kind of, can we envision the future 20 years from now, 50 years from now? Design is about visualizing early to get people inspired, to bring them along to where you're trying to go. And then implementation gaps. A lot of what we do in the civil service, I think, is about kind of outputs. We're focused on outputs, getting the next policy out, getting kind of a speech for the minister, getting the next thing over and over again. And we rarely get an opportunity to stop and think of how we achieve those outcomes. And so kind of we're using design to kind of pull us back into a space where we can actually think about outcomes and try and design the future that we want. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is turn the thing inside out. You know, the way we've done it traditionally is government says what they want. We call it business needs. That gets turned into policy, that gets turned into process, that gets turned into a service, and then your citizen uses that service. We're trying to do it the other way around, which is more relationship rather than transaction. And we have massive programs like our Life Events program, which starts with mapping the journey of the citizen as they go through particular services, and then shaping the technology, the service, and going back the other way. I'm going to fly through these quickly because I do know we're tight on time. Seán asked me to talk about how this relationship started. Applied teaching. A lot of my teaching when I was here, I was program directing a master's program, a couple of master's program, and we actually started getting more and more public and civil servants on it because they want to change. And what we realized is we could actually teach them how to be designers, to go back to their organizations, to make change. Design is very teachable. And so the projects we were working on, a lot of them were public sector and civil service projects, and we could see the value of that. And then our students wanted to work on societal challenges. They didn't want to be designing kind of commercial products anymore. They wanted to be trying to tackle homelessness and tackle poverty and war. This is third and fourth year students. So I knew there was an opportunity to bring to teach design across the public sector. Applied research, so a lot of my research was with the HSE, the innovation program in particular, so working with doctors and nurses and all healthcare staff, and they got it. They could understand design and they were bringing it into their work, and not just to design new fixes, but actually change workflows and processes. I developed a program, and so these all looked very good when I was applying for a job. We designed a program called Design on the Front Line, where we got design students started here in Maynooth, but it was all design students across the country to tackle healthcare challenges, and that's turned into a scholarship, and that's ongoing. And then even putting maker labs in 5 hospitals. So healthcare staff could actually turn that idea they had into a prototype quite quickly. Some of you might be familiar with my lab. That was a government-funded project that I was PI on. It's the most exciting 4 years of my life. It was amazing. We started trying to bring design into Maynooth, but actually it grew almost internationally, and we worked across the country and across the globe on projects. And there was lots of them, but in particular, I think the work we did with the National RPL project, doing the design research, trying to understand recognition of prior learning to feed into that project, the Unlocking Potential project, pathways for people coming out of the prison system into universities, and how we make that journey easier, but then how we show the importance of that and capture this story. Research publications, which I was sharing with colleagues in the Pender, they were related to higher education, but it was design in public sector organizations. And that paper in particular, in Herd Journal, it was supposed to be a reflection of the last 40 years of higher education. Being designers, we actually said we don't want to think about the past. What's the next 40 years look like? And they actually accepted our paper and saying this could be the pathway forward for higher education, which is really exciting. And then the work we did on the Maynooth strategy, getting out, talking to our students, our staff, bringing them together to think about what the future looks like. So all of those kind of outwardly facing applied projects were very useful when I was writing a letter in response to a call from Minister McGrath looking for members to join the Innovation Advisory Board out of Depender. So that was part of the Making Innovation Real policy. Making Innovation Real came about from an OECD piece of research saying we're not being systematic in how we do innovation, and we need design. We need all types of design, but in particular service design. So I was delighted to join the Innovation Advisory Board and input into what we could do and emphasizing that we need designers. So I almost made my own job at that point. I was asked then to chair a group of designers and academics and civil servants who were using design approaches. There's pockets of it happening, to chair a group to develop a set of design principles for government in Ireland. This is the first piece of policy I created. I didn't even know I was creating a policy. It was just a design project for me. Even to the point where we changed it from a working group to a design team. And we brought in lots of experts, as I said, inside and outside of civil service, and actually worked through a design process. Phase 0 was about understanding the problem and framing where we want to go, what we want to achieve. Empathy, talking to civil servants about new approaches, defining the problem, brainstorming sessions to come up with different ways of how we do these principles, what they're for, what impact they'll have. Prototyping, nobody could understand why we created 3 different versions of the principles, but it was really because rather than saying this is the way we go, it's here's some options, now give us feedback on which is better, so you feel part of the process, and then iterate, take the learnings from that and develop the policy. And so we came up with 10 design principles, and it's remarkable when I go into calls and go into meetings, people have them stuck on their wall because they give them permission to work in a slightly different way that's very natural, but very different. So starting with user needs, challenging the assumptions, designing for simplicity, being more inclusive, designing for trust. All of these things resonated with people because it was so well researched. And the policy document came with kind of an explanation of what we meant by that. The response to that was so good, people started calling for more design. They wanted training, they wanted designers in their organization. They were also maybe using design wrong. So being quite abstract with our principles, people were saying, oh yeah, what I do is design. I talk to people. We're like, no, it takes more than conversations, or it takes more than just saying you're tackling assumptions, or it's as simple as can be. So we kind of decided that the next stage would be an action plan for designing better public services, which we released in 2022. I'm not going to go to all the details, but it's available on our website. But really, it's about demonstrating that we're committed to design. So that's putting funding behind it. It's about setting up a central design function, which I'll talk about in a minute, cross-government supports. It's about increasing design capability. So it's training of civil servants, bringing more designers in, various programs in partnership with institutions to deliver specialist design skills, and then design resources and job descriptions. So there's no job descriptions for designers at the moment in the civil service, and currently working on that. And then foster a culture. So it's getting out, celebrating the successes, of which there are a growing number, facilitating design challenges, which I'll talk to in a moment. And then we launched this with Minister Donoghue at a great event, and just great for someone who's been passionate about design and trying to advocate for its use to have it kind of go to cabinet and be approved by cabinet was a very exciting day. I mentioned the central design unit. So we're still kind of formulating what that looks like, but at the moment we have 2 design leads, myself and Aidan Boyle, who's come back from New Zealand to work on the delivery side. I'm on the policy side, and the central design team sits kind of in the middle, which is quite unique, drawing on both our expertise. We're currently recruiting or about to recruit for design supports because it's quite lonely and there's a lot going on to support us. We have, I think, 5 design leads now gone into different departments, which is very exciting. It's the first time many departments will be bringing in design at a management level. And then we have these, what we call communities of practice. So it's kind of centrally, we have the central unit. We will be working with those designers who are in different units And then we have outside communities, a huge amount of designers that are passionate about their discipline and about designing public services. But we also have a growing number, which is very exciting, of champions of design in departments, civil servants who recognise that this is a way they want to work, and we're upskilling them, and we're partnering with them to get them up to a level. This is an example of some design work going on. This is mapping a young person's journey as they try to get a driving license. So you can get this idea. This is about 5 meters long, 2 meters high. Every step in the journey, all the challenges, the websites they have to go, the frustrations that they have to go through, and we have about 6 different personas of the people who are going on this journey. And what we do with this is we bring in not just the Department of Transport, not just the RSA, but we bring in all the departments that might touch off this driving journey, and we look at it and say, how do we improve it? What can we remove? How do we either digitize this, or how do we make this journey better? And we're doing the same with students entering higher education. We're doing the same with having a baby. We'll be looking at the end of life journey. It's this kind of bringing multi-departments, taking a design approach to understand the problem, and then bringing all the stakeholders together to try and come up with the solutions. One of my first workshops was looking at the journey of someone having a baby, and a colleague described this workshop as historic because we had members of the Office of the Chief Information Officer, Department of Health, HSE, Department of Children, Department of Education, all in the room. Each table was a phase in that journey. Each table had a new parent on that table, and they were working together to understand the problems and imagine the future. So it was just changing the normal way of doing things, changing how we convene people to think about problems. We formed a really nice partnership with Munster Technological University on a project called the Ideate project out of the Nimbus Centre. A big part of all of the design work we're doing is starting with amplified needs. So starting with the people who find it hardest to access services, who have the most amplified needs, and working with Nimbus, who have expertise in getting out to the community, whether it's social care. This is with, and in fact coming to me, this is with one group of stakeholders who are looking at our new government digital wallet, which we're prototyping. But rather than trying to please all of the people all of the time, which is an impossible task, we're going to the edges, because that's where the real insight lives. And we design to meet their needs. And when we can design to meet the people at the edges needs, it works better for everybody. And so it's a really valuable approach for a lot of the work we're doing. We're also getting to contribute to international policy. This is a group of designers meeting in London to workshop the draft recommendations for human-centered public administration, which is now through the public consultation, and it's going to be OECD policy quite shortly, which is very exciting. And that's talking about kind of design leadership, design approaches across all of public administration, and we're very lucky to be able to contribute our work to those recommendations. I'm very nearly there. Sorry for the speed. We're going to work on really interesting projects as well out of our driving life event project. Some of the insights we were getting by taking a design approach, talking to young people, actually alerted the Department of Transport to say, well, actually, could we look at road safety through this design approach? And so for the last couple of months, we've had designers out talking to young people, understanding what's going on from their perspective. And very interestingly, we actually partnered with the Spark program in the HSE, because it's not just a transport problem. This is a public health problem as well. So we're actually working together as a group to understand these, and hoping to convene a group of stakeholders for a kind of brainstorming sessions, kind of ideation, kind of design type work to actually explore maybe more lateral approaches to road safety issues. It's been a very busy year, so excited about the people we've been working with. almost everybody. But in particular, I think kind of doing a huge amount with the Department of Education. We now have a designer on a new strategy oversight group, which is an incredible opportunity to bring design at a very senior level. We're also on the court service modernization program, having a design voice there, and the OECD on citizens experience oversight group. So the response has been remarkable. People get excited, especially civil servants, when we say we're taking a design approach to the budgetary process. So we're a little bit of the way through, and that is kind of interviewing all the people, stakeholders involved in the budgetary process, which is a very old process and hasn't been innovated, and it's ripe for change. There's parts of it are quite frustrating. I'm looking at her former SecGens who probably bring back bad memories of this process. But from a design point of view, it's the perfect project. Lots of stakeholders, lots of points of friction. The timings are go into flux. There's a need for empathy on both sides. And so we've mapped that journey, and I remember our principal officer over that, his words were, "Thank God it's out of my head now." You know, it's very complicated, and there's a lot of people working on it, but they're working on little pieces of it. And so now we have, again, a 5-meter map of the budgetary process. We've identified pain points, and we'll be going out then kind of outside of Depender to talk to line departments of people who are involved in it, and actually try to bring people together to imagine what could be next. So we have lots of insights. I'm not going to give away anything, but kind of insights like levers to reward positive behavior, deconstructed budget, inside out to outside in. So there's kind of a really nice opportunity there, and it's a very meaty and exciting project for us. We use a design approach to help the Department of Education develop their new data strategy. And this was a goosebump moment for me to be called out in the foreword by the current SecGen, talking about how kind of the design approach helped kind of engage stakeholders and actually lead to a more human-centered data strategy. We actually mapped data against student journeys and against teacher journeys, and it was very exciting. And that strategy is on the Department of Education's website. And just to finish, I'd say kind of we have a big vision. This is a year's worth of work. From what I've seen in a year, I think the opportunity to meet this vision is very real. We want to position Ireland as a global exemplar of design-led innovation. We want to kind of change how people work. We want to infuse design principles. We want to kind of, it's the evidence-based decision-making, but maybe it's that plus kind of creative exploration, more experimentation, more prototyping, and very excited by the support that we get, not just in Depender, but across the system. I think the future's very exciting for design and government. Thank you.
Right. Well done. Thanks to the two of you. You did what you said you'd do, which was deliver something really interesting and engaging. And obviously you didn't do the other bit, which was do it within 20 minutes, but that's all right. That's okay.
Thanks for forgiveness.
Yeah, that's okay. So we're going to keep going for a wee while. We're not trying to run out of the room, but we do appreciate that some people may have to, or indeed disconnect from online. So we're around about 50 people in total in present or online, so great engagement. I was going to ask you about the going native bit, but I'm not going to ask you, Trevor. Sarah, how different has it been for you having somebody like Trevor and trying to make sure that he doesn't do what he described as typical civil servant behaviours? Now, having regard to the fact that you just described your own background, which is a sort of a emerging background of civil servants who've come in with different experiences, not necessarily straight from school or college. So
yeah, great. No, good question. I think from my point of view, there's a bit about, so the commitment so talking about design as an example of us trying to build up these different capabilities, the commitment is there, which is great. So the work that Trevor described, the government plan, government group plan around building and design, commitment, capability and culture is there, which is fantastic. I think part of my role probably is to how would you describe it, kind of protect that space a bit, and to use the opportunity that we have within government policy and those commitments to really to show value, I think, is a big thing. And when Trevor was talking, I was making my own notes, but I think actually so our transformation agenda, first of all, transformation would suggest kind of big change. So as Trevor said, not just incremental change, and incremental change is more the norm probably. So first of all, we have a mandate for transformation, and we need to use that, and we are using that. But that involves change. So as you all know, change is hard for people a lot of the time. When we're talking about system-wide change, that has to be supported and kind of managed as well. So that's sort of part of our department's role. What I think are really, an insight for me over the last year is it requires ourselves to change as well, right, as organizations, okay? One thing that's been fantastic, I think, about Trevor's approach in supporting that is showing the value. And he's described and referred to like a large number of external kind of projects, external to our department's boundaries, kind of projects where he's working across the system to support colleagues to work on really difficult challenges using design. We also have a prioritization of a number of internal projects within our organisation to show the value internally. So I think that combination, kind of framed as we're all the time showing the value of the approach to things that actually are sitting on people's desks and are important to them at different levels across the system, to maintain that support and protect that space, I think is sort of how I'd see it. So we're trying to help him not go native, but I think that's an ongoing process of making sure we show the benefit of this approach, which is very significant. So luckily we've loads to show.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to open it up. Anybody want to come in from the floor? Rebecca, get to this.
Hi.
Hey, Rebecca.
Thanks so much. Oh.
Yeah. Just for the online bit, yeah.
Hi, thanks so much. Just to point, first of all, thank you for the really important work. And I think it's just an observation to underscore, I guess, how vital I think it is, and right now in particular. Maybe I'm a bit of a masochist, but I've been listening to too many postmortems on the American election at the moment. And one theory of the case really speaks to the ineffectiveness perceived among government and the inability to change those kind of 19th century tools for 21st century problems, and the kind of morass of difficulties, and the process, being stuck in process in order where people don't feel like government is delivering for them and actually hitting them where they're feeling the pain in their lives at the moment. And that's particularly been seen in blue states and blue cities. Housing is the clear example, in planning, but in other kind of more economic responses to inflation that people never saw. Everything takes so long to hit them, and we all see then the potential ramifications of that when you open the doors for people that want to blow up the whole system and say the government can't deliver and can't work for them. So it's, again, another theory, but I think it just, I suppose, underscores the kind of social cohesion piece to what government effectiveness means. And I suppose any thoughts on that would be appreciated too. Thanks.
I'd just say, like, I can empathize with it, but the picture we put up there from the OECD, it's led out of the White House, and so for the first time there's designers in the White House, and they were kind of showing their work and talking about the process, and it was so exciting, the work they're doing. And I haven't spoken to Dustin since, but I'm sure it's all going to change. But they were making massive inroads. A lot of the work that I showed there, kind of on the corridors of the White House, and I presume it's going to be gone now. I also think there's a great article I read recently around deliverism, and so kind of the democratic system often kind of focus on really important things that'll have a massive impact, but maybe it's missing what's resonating, as you said, with the red states. I would say insight, and kind of a lot of the work we're going out doing is bringing that insight back into decision making. And I showed you the road safety project that was sparked by one insight that the assistant secretary, or one of the assistant secretaries in transport, got from hearing a synthesized insight from a piece of research that made him question everything. And that's what a really good insight does. It shifts you from one story to a better story. I think we might have a lack of insight because those kind of findings from surveys and focus groups get diluted down and they get turned into reports, and the reports get turned into papers for the minister, and suddenly we lose connection with what the real problem is. I think what design is doing really well is maintaining that real insight, that raw insight, all the way through to people who are writing those policies and making those decisions.
Yeah, just to add to that in brief, I think that's a huge concern. Of course, a kind of a concern that's recognised across internationally currently and nationally as well. I think we need to pay attention to data around what you're talking about. We have lots of sources of data to try and understand where people are at in terms of their trust in government and their trust in public institutions. Again, the team that we're part of links with the OECD for their work on trust in public institutions, right, to better understand what drives trust. And to, I suppose Ireland is part of an international study run by OECD every 2 years to measure trust across services, but also trust in government, which I think is interesting too. So what is the public trust in institutions to tackle long-term complex challenges and things like this? So that's a really good data source just to be kind of aware of and for us to kind of pay attention to. We have that recognition in our own system as well through mechanisms like our national risk assessment, which takes place and is published each year by our Department of Public Expenditure, so recognising issues such as the ones you're talking about. And so we have to read those, we have to use the data that's there, read it and understand it, and understand where people are at in terms of some of those challenges. I think then in response, there's again a huge drive across government to, first of all, to deliver, and so investment in our services obviously being a key part to that, but also then to do hopefully what Trevor's talking about there, to actually build up our capacity to open up our policy making and to do better. So I think this focus on design is probably part of the response to some of the challenges that you're talking about as well. So back to our themes, we need to use the data, understand what's going on, try to understand the complexity of some of those challenges, and we have to respond, which we do through our, I suppose, our mechanisms, including some of what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Fascinating and sort of daunting presentation, but obviously loads of positive energy in it, which is great. I guess you were talking about a lot of sort of process things, and one of the contradictions I think is interesting about Ireland is that if you look at things like power distance relationships, as a nation, we're actually very egalitarian, but our social institutions are extremely conservative. So if you look at whether it's the civil service or health or justice, they're very hierarchical institutions. And I used to think that maybe that's a sort of colonial hangover. But for instance, in health, we're much more hierarchical in our health system in Ireland than is the NHS in the UK. So I guess that leads me to think, okay, so we can think about different processes for doing things, and then the idea of sort of form following function. If structures don't want to change, then form won't follow function. So how much of the emphasis is on the process, and how much of it is on addressing hierarchies, which often seek to, protect privilege and position and so on?
I'll give my version of the answer to that. I think when I was brought in from a design perspective, initially it was to lead the life events program, which is service design. Here's a maybe a poor service or a less effective service, and now can we redesign that and make it proactive and join it up across departments? I am not the type of designer that likes to go in and just redesign a service. It's change, and so a lot of those departments that you saw there, and probably frustrating initially to people like Sarah. I'm very social with design. I was going into departments giving talks, and I was change managers, because you have to kind of inform people that there's another way of doing things, expose them to maybe how the NHS kind of use design. So they've got about 20 designers in one little piece, and about 500 overall. Right. How they're using design and what kind of impact, and just kind of exposing people, and because it's coming from Depender and it's national policy, to say actually you've got permission to use these design principles, expose them to what a different way of approaching problems is, a different way of engaging, and that's been really useful for us, because it's brought us into I think 8 kind of management boards speaking about design. Of those, I think 6 are looking at either taking on designers or developing a new strategy. You know, the data strategy for education was one example that started off, let's see what design can do, and now we're looking at kind of an overarching strategy. So I think it's easy to maintain the norm, but actually to try something new, like a design approach, it actually requires a little bit of security, and people are getting that when they see it applied successfully in the Department of Education, or we're seeing Depender using it. So I think there's a change management piece which started at services, and now it's going into policies, and I think it'll give us 3 or 4 years, and I think it'll be used in every management board, the majority of management board. But it's a risky thing to try a brand new approach. Sure.
Yeah, I just add
you can have the civil service
yeah.
that.
Well, again, reformed. Well, new enough civil service, but no. Look, I think it's a great question, and I think you're making me think of obviously my background, as you know, back in psychology and organizational development. But no, practically speaking, I think that is about how we reform our institutions, probably, and what is that really about? It probably is about, as well as structures, like people and culture. And I think we've a huge we've a significant history of reform, and I'd probably point to kind of reform programs over the last, going back 10 years, 15 years, etc. And some of the achievements there around kind of, I think, a bigger achievements that I mentioned one earlier, which I think is significant, about the opening up of certainly civil service bodies to recruitment of different types at different levels, being a huge reform, right? So when you look at people and the mobility of skills into the civil service, the wealth of backgrounds of experience, probably myself and Trevor are 2 examples, but that's a change in the last probably 10 years that has really opened up the institutions and the system. So again, that's a bit of a focus on civil service. But I think very positive and very, very relevant. And then another thing it makes me think of is obviously the civil service, and again, kind of, well, civil and public service capacity for change, which we saw during COVID, right? And another project that's underway out of my team with that perspective on really trying to learn from that experience is a project that we have underway, supported by what's called the Technical Support Instrument from the European Commission. And that's about, so what we're looking at there is what we're calling 6 cases of positive deviance. Okay, so things that across a number of different public service institutions, and actually a big feature of them is what we're very interested in pushing further, that collaboration between civil and public service, which I think is really key to all of this, right? Closing the gaps between, as we said, kind of those responsible for designing and delivering services and policymakers. But during COVID, we saw a really fascinating, as you all know and experienced, changes in that regard. So disruption to practices and institutions, and I suppose that piece of work actually is trying to capture, okay, how did that happen? What went well? And some of the insights are, so some of the examples are things like the vaccination program, like the rollout and the establishment of the vaccination program and the success in terms of its uptake and the support for that. But others are looking at the community call service, which was again led by community and voluntary sector, working with public service bodies about rolling out community supports and getting communities involved in actually providing supports in a kind of system-wide way throughout COVID. So that's really interesting and promising, and I suppose it just speaks to that need to capture, to learn. You know, I think there's a kind of narrative that, okay, we're all back to normal, but I think actually when you look at what is required to change, it probably is that piece about both the attention that we have to change in terms of people, culture, and how we support people and the development of the culture, plus learning from those positive examples. So there's plenty there that we need to harness, and I suppose again, hopefully within this transformation agenda, we do have some of the space for that, which is positive. But yeah, certainly that's a very bigger picture, historical. There's a perspective on that we need to kind of that we sit in. So we need to really learn from that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I just asked some questions that were online, and the feedback's been incredible. So
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really positive, and lots of people are very excited by what it is you're saying. So I'll read out just some of the questions. Maybe we can tackle some of them. Some of them actually relate to the previous question that Matt was asking. So Ciara Leonard from UCD, Ciara's doing some great work down there on preparing the HEI system for this kind of engagement. From your perspective, Sarah, what would you like to see the HEIs do more of in order to make your life easy and to bring that kind of innovation design thinking? Where do you see the HEI agenda presently, and what can we do to scale and make more accessible our work? A question from Kerry that I think has been answered on this hierarchical, just, you know, the design's excellent, but when the tires hit the road in terms of the department, what with bureaucracy and legislation and all the kind of things that bog down the opportunities of building new tables or making new things. So I think you've answered that a little bit, but you may want to reflect on that a little bit further. The question of how Trevor sources the public, presumably the co-creation methods you use involve the public in discussions and the user groups and the services are designed for. So how does that process take place? Ray Griffin's question. Another one from the DOE. Obviously someone wants to get your job, Trevor, or a similar a job. How do you recruit for, you mentioned that there were more designers now working in the unit. Where do those jobs go? Is it publicjobs.ie or wherever someone wants some advice on opportunities that might be coming up? Mary Doyle, Mary's doing work from the RIA with himself and Seán on this, and she'd be fascinated to know all of this stuff you're doing, whether you plan to bring it all together as a kind of bundle, so we can see all the projects and so on, and the takeaways. So any plans to accumulate and gather and pool an expertise on a project website or something of that nature, a book, end of project book? Stephen Collins asks for failures to be talked about, problems. It's very, we present a very idealistic but energizing picture of design thinking. So often design fails, and that's all part design is allowing permission to failure. So how does the notion of design fail, and have you encountered falling forward or whatever else is the question there? What's the negative side of it, and is there even a negative? Does design not conceptually erase the very idea that there could be a negative? You fail, that's part of the learning. I'm going to stop there. So it's questions about HEI support, questions about whether you're assembling the material on a project website, questions about do you plan to advertise for more designer roles and where can people access them, questions about the difficulties of failing along the way and how there's another side to the progressive story you were telling. And I suppose questions there then on questions there on the hitting the ground running and the hierarchical question, which I think you've already tackled from Mac's question. So perhaps you could have a go at some of those.
Those, yeah.
Where do you start? I'd just say from
Go ahead,
a HEI perspective, look, when I was here, I was in a very small design department. We don't have enough designers out there, and a lot of kind of small departments, like the type of work from a design perspective we need is kind of anthropology design to really understand. And sometimes I think they don't get a look in. From a funding perspective, the work they're doing is quite different. So I'd love to see design looked at as a serious kind of offering from a university, because it's so important to us, and I think that's going to grow rapidly, and I don't think we're going to be able to keep up with the need. If you have anything to add on that, on the policy side. So you've thrown so many questions.
Sorry,
I'll keep going.
Yeah.
Publicjobs.ie, and there will be kind of an AO panel going out very soon, probably before Christmas. So that's where to find that. I'm leaving the difficult ones to last. At the moment there's only 2 designers, and it's full on, but the intention will be to pull together all the case studies of the work we're doing. We'd love to put on design seminars and design conferences. We actually work a lot with the HSC, the Spark program there. So we put on a symposium for Transformation Week, and we try to build in case studies into all our public sector conferences. But we will be pulling kind of a lot of collateral together, including kind of playbooks and work books and videos and things like that. But the case studies are going to be critical. Department of Education did write up the data strategy process, so it's capturing that. Design failure is true. I like the optimism in our approach. I think I mentioned it at the beginning. The really good thing about design is it's risk mitigation. So your failures are not very visible, because they don't turn into massive failures. You know, kind of some of the approaches we use can fail at a small scale. And actually touching on one of the other questions, how do we get users and citizens? Kind of, we've had failures there. Like, we have designers out at the moment doing what we call guerrilla research, stopping people, but people think they're politicians and they won't talk to them, and they're getting abuse at the moment. That's a kind of failed piece of research because of timing. And so we have lots of failures, but they're so small we're actually catching them before they turn into big failures. I think that's the difference. We don't have pilot projects that fail. We have small, contained experiments. It could be in a school trying out a new approach. It could be in a government department. So it's managed failure, managed risk, and we're not at it long enough. Also, kind of some of the language that we use in design that I would use. I bombed the management board where I'm talking about kind of design terms to our Secretary General and our management team, and they haven't a clue what I'm talking about. So that was kind of, again, a micro failure. So I've learned to change our language a little bit. But thankfully, the design approach allows us, I think, to avoid those big failures that either make the newspapers or that kind of turn people off the approach. Hopefully I got through a lot of...
Brilliant.
Many of them. Yeah.
I might just add to, I think the one I'll add to is the HEIs and the engagement, because that's probably a nice place to kind of to summarize a bit more. I think the main point there is, you know, I think we both had slides about ecosystem, right? So the need for you know, to create a good environment for all of us who are in that ecosystem to work together. Like, we can't afford not to do that, because we're a small country, and we you know, the capacity, certainly from I think we mentioned this earlier, but sometimes the time within the system given to kind of space and reflection and accessing knowledge and resources can be tight, right? Because there's a lot of the roles tend to be broad and not that specialist, despite having created these specialist streams. So we have to work together, and I think there's a really good culture of partnership across all those different parts of the ecosystem, kind of out of necessity. So again, and I'm sure among your experience, there's many examples of again engagement with the government, with policymakers, with consultation, etc. I think though at the moment probably kind of bigger developments to kind of keep an eye on would be so as I said, our kind of framing is that better public services agenda. Okay, so for the communication around that, it is we have a kind of an outreach piece where we want to engage across a kind of a broad number of contacts, but again the kind of site that we have, which is a government.gov.ie site, is a good port of call just to know what's going on with us and how to engage on any of our kind of outward kind of outreach pieces that seek to engage different communities and stakeholders will be there. There's a very good piece of work going on, which I should have mentioned earlier, by the Department of Public as well. We're another important have another important kind of central government role with all of this, and that is the development of a policy handbook, which I think is going to be published shortly and will be a resource for policymakers, but which will highlight the importance again of kind of a guidance for policymakers about how they can incorporate what they need to focus on, supports and highlighting the importance of data research, etc. So that's a good development in the system, and a lot of things will hang off that as well in terms of giving that the guidance and support to policymakers across the system. And then really just again to give that recognition of the work of Department of Further and Higher Education as well, because really a lot of systemic supports to engage with research community and with all the different actors in higher education institutions are being driven by that department. So again, very much worth remaining kind of tuned into their initiatives, including as I mentioned, that initial call for evidence I think is closed now, but other system-wide kind of channels and interventions. I know my colleague has had to leave, but all of their work and the strategy around that, I think, very worth kind of understanding and keeping an eye on. And then of course, big mechanisms to engage higher education through obviously research funding of the research agencies, the SIT under a number of our departments are fairly key. Consultation channel, I think, is an interesting one. As you've heard, we're really trying to evolve our kind of our approach to consultation and engagement across the system, so there'll be more a lot more activity in that area. As you'll be aware, of course, there are many existing channels for consultation and for engagement with stakeholders, and it is an encouragement to keep an eye on those as well, because that public and organisational consultation aspect is built into really every government policy making process. So we're sort of saying we do a lot of consultation and engagement. The departments developing policy are doing that consultation. Of course, that's an area that's evolving, and we're trying to do better and become more innovative. But the status quo is already a huge amount of opportunities for engagement through those channels. And apart from that, I think it's just great to have opportunities like this, really, just to meet yourselves and to hopefully share some of the work and to have that kind of agenda around. I think what I said at the start, like I know there's a lot of feedback about kind of not understanding like how the processes work. So I suppose trying to share some of that and be kind of more open and clear and transparent about how policies and services are designed and delivered. So all of that's in addition to everything that Trevor said, because he's covered all of our our important kind of attempts to try to do all of this better as well through design as one example. But so the final point, I think that drive towards accessing multidisciplinary knowledge, I think, is very strong within our context at the moment. So like I said, we and maybe that's a bit of the kind of framing, we built up our economic capacity out of a particular need as we see more complexity in the challenges that we're facing, as you've all outlined, that need for really building, bringing in the knowledge and best practice and models of all disciplines is really, I think, really important and recognised. And design is one example, but I think that there's a wealth of knowledge there, and we actually need we need all of the best ideas to address those challenges that we kind of understand are there. So yeah, we'll keep trying to do that in through as many channels as we can. Yeah.
Okay, listen, we're going to have to finish up, but before we close, Mark's has a few reflections, and then I just want to make a few closing comments.
You'll ask me to be quick, which I can. But I will try to. Before I do so, just to tell you, there was one question I wanted to read out. It was from Mark Boyle, and it was would Trevor stop using some brilliant slides because it's putting the rest of us to shame.
Great stuff, yeah.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, no, thank you, both of you, Sarah and Trevor. One absolutely brilliant, really exciting, really energizing, really interesting spark of chemistry between design and psychology. And I'll take Sarah's point. What comes through from you is the multidisciplinary nature of it. And I'm really curious to know, you finished with this in your last question, but how universities can do better at training multidisciplinary literate people, because we lock people in to disciplines really. So I think that crossing boundaries is part of the 21st century university that you're talking about. So brilliant relationship and really exciting. I think the question Matt asked was key. This question, what's missing here is a discussion of the politics of design. So design is playing into service reform, but of course that raises the question: who governs, who controls design, for what ends, what audience, to whom is, what metrics have been used to judge the contribution of design to better delivery of services. I like the idea of don't going native. It implies that actually some disruption is required, and that's part of the politics. And the way what I took from what you said really was that it's not so much the politics of design that matters, it's design politics. But design itself, if you hurtle it into service reform, can trouble and wrapping up the space to create newness. So design is how newness comes into the world. So the politics of design as design politics, I think, could be interesting. Two final points. One was design can be used in a whole variety of ways. And Sarah implied, I've heard this in a few of our seminars, that we essentially know what service reforms we want to do, perhaps through the OECD world and others. Now, of course, you always need to be looking at disruptive new policies, but is the question really an implementation question? As we know what services are doing at the moment, we know what innovations we need to introduce. So are we designing for better implementation or designing for better policy? I think is one of the questions. And a related question is, presumably the long-term thing here is not designing for policy or for implementation, but it's designing for the development of an innovative ecosystem. And both of you used that word ecosystem. I'm wondering if that is what's the benefits and limits of thinking about the landscape in terms of ecosystem thinking. It implies maybe more equilibrium or more homeostasis around the various interlocking parts than actually exists. I was taken by Sarah's squiggly graph about the policy process not being and of course, unless we conceptualize the landscape of all the actors and their relationships through the concept of ecosystem or otherwise, we'll not be able to rebuild that. We need to know what the landscape looks like, and then think about how we can conceptualize a better landscape for more long-term thinking. So are we designing policy, or does the design process, could it be applied in a much more broader sense to redesign the whole ecosystem? And in that case, what's the unit concept? Is ecosystem the primary concept that we should be using, or does that place limits on what we're able to think about and do, given how anarchic some of these processes are? I'm going to stop there. Short enough, Seán?
Yeah, great.
Thank you very much.
So, just going to conclude and say, look, first of all, could we just give our appreciation to this pair again? Really good in this series that people have come along and shared, and we really appreciate how you've shared today. Look, I want to say thanks to Anne, who's really done a lot of the organisation here and has made sure it goes out live. And actually, that's what makes it accessible. So special thanks to Anne, and well done to Anne on all your help in the series. In the organisation of today, but she's not in the room at the moment. We'll be back with more of these hopefully in the new year, and we're also jointly with the Royal Irish Academy hosting a seminar on the 21st of January about research for policy and how universities and higher education institutions in general need to reflect on how they organise themselves to assist in engaging with government and so on. Listen, that's been really great, and listen, we really appreciate everybody's engagement, and thanks to everybody. So, Sinead,